Before we get started with today's podcast, we'd like to ask returning listeners to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you really enjoy it, share a link to this podcast with friends or family who would enjoy hearing our weekly discussions about basketball and basketball culture. Now, on to the show.
Yeah, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot, 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all there. Nice move by Steve Fisher here. Bring it into the 19-9 game.
Welcome to the 19-9 podcast. I am super excited about today's guest. We're going to have the Chucker introduce him, but we're going to talk about Villanova hoops today. The 1985 team, one of the greatest upsets in college basketball history. So I'm going to throw it to the Chucker so he can introduce our guest from that team today.
Gotcha. Thanks for the introduction, Aaron. We are excited to welcome to the 19-9 podcast today, Brian Harrington. Brian was a walk-on the 1985 Villanova team that downed Georgetown to win the national title, one of the biggest upsets in NCAA championship game history. Brian was a 4-year member of the Wildcats program, and that victory served as the culmination of his 4-year career with the Wildcats. So here on the 19-9 podcast, we are excited to welcome Brian Harrington. Brian, how you doing today?
Doing fantastic, Chucker. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being on.
Great. So we are in obviously odd times in American society today. Sports starting to make its comeback. What's been keeping you busy these last couple, weeks and months?
Yeah, with the lack of sports over the last few months, it's been difficult to stay engaged, but I have been following various things, watching a lot of movies, that's for sure. And it came across one the other night that I thought was, not directly sports related, was really interesting, and it's called The Speed Cubers, and it's about these I'll call them athletes because they can solve a Rubik's Cube in 6 seconds, which to me is mind-boggling.
Crazy. But
it's really a story about great sportsmanship between two of the best cubers in the world, and it's a very heartwarming. It's only 40 minutes, so I encourage everybody to watch it. While it's not directly a hardwood type sport, I think everybody will learn a lot and appreciate it.
I love that. I worked for Johns Hopkins. They run a summer program called CTY for talented kids, and they always had a big group of kids every summer who would amaze me with their Rubik's Cube skills. So it's legit.
and these people are competitive,
no doubt.
So it's got a big sporting element in it from that frame.
I was competitive too until they started smoking me every time.
Well, as someone who's nearly 40 years old and has yet to solve a Rubik's Cube, I'll have to check it out.
There you go. And now, a word from our sponsor. A-Zip Pizza is a build-your-own pizza place in Indiana and Kentucky. The jalapeno face is back. This pizza of the month is a jalapeno popper-inspired pizza and is one of A-Zip Pizza's most popular creations. It has ranch cream cheese, delicious smoky bacon, fresh sliced jalapenos for a little heat, sweet pepper jelly, and toasted panko for some crunch. It's only here in August, so get it before it's gone. They also have a ton of ingredients you can choose from to create something delicious on your own. Order online for curbside delivery at azippizza.com/order. Now, back to the show.
So, Brian, we're thrilled to have you here today. That Villanova team is really, when you talk about college basketball, that Villanova game against Georgetown, really one of the most iconic games in college basketball history. Such a memorable game from so many levels. And before we get to that, let's just kind of set that up because that's your senior year. But let's talk about kind of the journey to that moment. So tell us about your journey to becoming a walk-on Villanova to begin with. Where were you from? What was that path to Villanova like? And And how'd you get on the team?
Yeah, I grew up in right out of New York City in a town called Yonkers. So was always involved in multiple sports, but being kind of slight and small, gravitated really towards basketball in high school. And truth be told, I was kind of chasing my older brother, who was a New York City All-American guard, went down and played at William & Mary when I tell him William & Mary was actually pretty good. His senior year, he actually hit 2 free throws with a second left to beat North Carolina, who was ranked number 1 at the time. So, it was a legendary Phil Ford team. So I was kind of chasing a ghost. I loved the game, but he was certainly motivating. So played in high school and thought that's where my career was, going to end until I moved on to Villanova.
And so you tried out for the team to become a walk-on?
I did. And I did because I feared my high school basketball coach. He said to me, you either try out for that team or you do not come back to this school ever again, because I wouldn't talk to you. So I literally, just out of fear, introduced myself to one of the assistant coaches at the time, Marty Marbach, and said, Coach, I want to try out. And he said, okay, he gave me a whole laundry list of things that I needed to do to try out, to be eligible on October 15th. But this is, September 10th when we talked. So there was a lot of preseason to it.
Gotcha. Well, your brother, I presume you're talking about Billy Harrington. Yeah, 4-year guard there at William & Mary. Seemed to have a nice career. Yeah. He, truth be told, he was the player. But when he starts talking about it, I go dig my national championship ring out of the drawer and just start clinking it, and that kind of ends that conversation.
Like Shaq with Sir Charles.
Yeah. And I sense here they'll be a little modest about your basketball playing skills, because one of the things in our first conversation you talked about, you played in the famed Rucker Park League as a kid, growing up right outside of New York City. So what can you tell us about? That's a pretty historic, legendary league. What can you tell us about the Rucker Park League when you were in it? What stands out?
A few things. One was the intensity of the game on the court, right? I mean, it was summer nights, 90 degrees
outside,
just really intense. And, back then there was very few whistles. So you either came to play hard or you were going to get crushed and you were going to get disrespected.
Well, that got you ready for Big East basketball then.
It absolutely did. And, the other piece was the intensity of the crowd. These were people that this is big time entertainment, and you never knew who was going to show up, to play in a game. So these people, and their knowledge of basketball and their respect for the game, it was basketball Mardi Gras. Every night there was a party, around the game happening.
I love that phraseology, basketball Mardi Gras.
We might have to steal that for 1990. So, Brian, obviously the head of the program at Villanova is a pretty iconic figure in the game, Rollie Massimino. You've described him as a second father, but tell me a little bit about, you get to campus, you end up making the team as a freshman, as a walk-on. What were your first impressions of Coach Massimino?
Well, the first impression was, I don't know if this guy can make a decision. And here's why. We had a whole bunch of guys try out, and it came down to myself and another guy, another player. And he said, I'll tell you tomorrow who's going to make the team. And the next day came and he said, I can't decide today. I'll tell you tomorrow. Oh, wow. And this went on for 5 days.
And you're thinking you're not going to be able to go back to your school, or would that have been all right since you tried out at least?
I think it would have been all right, but I was literally going to die on that floor before I was going to give up. And he came the last day and he said, I can't decide. I'm going to keep you both. So, he was which, in retrospect and thinking about it, he was a guy who was very thoughtful. He wasn't going to make a snap decision. He had a plan. If that plan needed to be altered, in the case of, only choosing one, he kept two. He was always prepared, and he always tried to look like, how can someone contribute? There's a role for everyone. And he was demanding, as most freshmen in high school, I was taking some liberties with the length of my hair when I got there. I hadn't gotten a haircut in a long time. And after he said, I'm going to keep you both, he turned to me and said, get a haircut or don't come back.
You got a haircut.
I got a haircut.
I think that's a little bit underappreciated about that era of coaches, because you hear oftentimes about how hard they were on players, but I think that you don't hear as much about how much they cared and loved their players. And the more I learn about these like famous coaches like Massimino or Bob Knight, when they were at their peaks, they were equal parts both. They were hard on their guys, and it sounds like you had that similar experience with Massimino, but he loved you guys too.
He did. And I didn't get recruited, but I've heard stories over the years, and one of his lines when he was talking to families and kids, he said, this is not a 4-year commitment. This is a 40-year commitment. You're entering into a family, and be prepared to enter into that family, because you're just not going to come and go.
That's interesting. That really kind of speaks to, I know the closeness your team has even today. So certainly, I know we want to get to that, but let's kind of talk about the early part of your career, because your freshman season, you're a walk-on there. You guys make it to the Elite Eight and lose to North Carolina, team that obviously pretty well regarded, had Michael Jordan on it. Yep. And then the sophomore year, you make it to the Elite Eight again and lose to an iconic Houston team, yep. Dominated obviously by Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. So you guys had these great runs. What stands out, and unfortunately ended with two kind of all-time powerhouse squads. So what stands out about those two iconic teams? What do you recall about those ends of those seasons at those respective teams' hands?
Yeah, clearly Michael Jordan wasn't Michael Jordan back then, but James Worthy and they were loaded. And we were prepared. There's no doubt we were prepared, but they just, they kind of had more firepower. We had a great team both those years. John Pannone and Stu Granger were both All-Americans. We were highly regarded going in. It wasn't anything about being intimidated. It's just, the better team won on both occasions. So, and if the NC State doesn't, make an incredible shot at the end, we lose to the national champion, a couple of times. So, no harm there with those two again, like iconic, like just all time teams. One of the only the thought with respect to Houston was, and I'm going to share, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind. But, the scouting report was, we got to play Olajuwon. We got to play all these guys, that they had. Benny Anders. We got to make sure they don't score. Don't worry about Larry Minshew. Larry's not going to beat us. Well, Larry had like 30.
Oh, no. Famous last words as a coach, right?
Yeah, famous last words. Mitch Bonaguro is a great coach, but that was his scout, and we all looked at him and he's like, "Don't worry about Larry," and we get him to this day.
Well, losing to a team with two Hall of Famers, no shame in that. No. So then, junior season, you guys kind of have a little bit of a, kind of a down season after two Elite Eight runs. So then you come into the 1984-1985 season, very veteran group, obviously led by Ed Pickney, kind of being the prime name in that. But you guys enter the season unranked, and those are the external expectations, not ranked in the preseason AP poll. But give us a sense internally, where was that team's mindset going into that 1984-85 season? What did you guys really think you were capable of?
We knew we were capable, if we played to the best of our ability, to getting back to the Elite Eight. because we had been there, that we had, senior, you mentioned senior laden. Yeah, I was a senior, but, Eddie Pickney, Dwayne McClain, Gary McClain, these guys had logged a lot of minutes, and going in unranked was motivational. We had Georgetown and St. John's and great teams in the Big East. And we kind of felt like the middle child. And that put a chip on our shoulder.
You had that mindset, it sounds like still.
Yeah, it really motivated us. And we were under the radar. But we knew that we could play with any team in the Big East. And since we knew we could play with any team in the Big East, we knew we could play with any team in the country.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so you guys have a pretty solid regular season. You go 18-8 overall. You're 9-6 in the Big East. I should say 18-18. You're 18-8 overall, 9-6 in the Big East, heading into your regular season finale. Now that game is at Pitt on national TV, and I know that's a pretty memorable game for you and a lot of your teammates. And not for good reasons necessarily. So take us back to that game. That's the regular season finale. And you, I think, have called that perhaps that squad's most important regular season moment. So take us back to that Pitt game to close out the regular season. What was that like?
Yeah, it was, we knew we were on the bubble, right? Because 20 wins back then was the magic number to get into the NCAA tournament. That was the litmus test. If you had 20, you had a good shot. So we're 18-8, and we're going in thinking, okay, well, we can get 19-8, and we'll get one in the Big East. That's 20-8, and all of a sudden, the first half at Pitt was probably one of the worst halves of basketball that we, as a team played that year. And, our guys were just disformed at all. And Coach Massimo, knowing full well what was on the line, a tournament bid. And he said at halftime, he looked at them and he said, "You have 5 minutes to prove that you want to play or you're coming out. And this game, we're going to let, and he looked around the room and he goes, everybody else is going to get to play." And so what happened was we come out in the second half, and, I'm going to say, I haven't watched the game in a long time, but less than 2 minutes in, he yanked everybody.
Wow. That's so gutsy.
And that's the way he was. He wanted to win, but if people weren't performing, he was not going to just go through the motions. And he knew that, he needed to make a point, not only, to guys to play hard, but these are opportunities in life that are under your control.
Do you think it's even possible to make a coaching move like that anymore? Just like with the way coaches move around, because just to think about a coach today having the courage to take out his starters and that with a tournament bid on the line seems crazy.
It really does, but that speaks to who he was. And, look, I look back at that game and I was a member of a very elite club at Villanova, and it was called, self-called the 20-20-20 Club. And what that stood for was, we're up 20 points, we're down 20 points, there's 20 seconds to go, and, it's kind of my time to shine.
I love it.
And all of a sudden, there's, 18 minutes to go in the half on national television. And I'm like, wow, okay, here we go.
I haven't even done my stretches yet.
Yeah, I had figured out my role, over 4 years. So I was comfortable with it. But it was, that's Coach Mass. And it really, that really, I think, set the tone for moving forward and having us have the opportunity to win.
You guys lost to that St. John's team, but I got to hear a little bit about St. John's, because I love that St. John's team too. With Mullen was on that team, right? And
Walter Berry.
Yeah, Walter Berry. Oh man, that's such an amazing
Mark
team.
Jackson. Yep.
What was it to watch those guys and just prepare for a team like that, especially since they seemed like they really had your guys' number?
They did. Chris and Eddie Pickney had grown up together and, played on every AAU team together. And, Chris was and is still one of the greatest college basketball players to ever play the game. He had complete ice water in his veins and was at a size that could either play guard or, he was the original point forward. Yeah.
He's a big guy.
Big guy, deceivingly big. But they were, we just didn't, basketball's a game of matchups, and we just didn't match up with them at all for some reason. And to this day, I don't understand why. Because athletically, Walter Berry was athletic, Willie Glass was athletic, but they weren't loaded with really great athletes. But they were loaded with really good basketball, really smart basketball players.
I'll tell you what, I watched the Dream Team. They had all these on the Olympic Channel this summer, and I was actually really surprised like how athletic Mullen was, because I kind of just remember him now, years and years later, as just kind of a shooter. But man, that guy, like super quick hands, really quick feet, like deceptively athletic. Like I think athleticism starts to get thought of as only like jumping really high or dunking a bunch, but there's so much to athleticism, and if you are elite in certain areas, it's going to make you stand out. Whether those are the areas that people notice the most, it could still help you to be a great player.
Chris Mullen hit a lot of great shots in his career, but the most memorable one for me was we were playing them, and it was kind of a breakaway, and he comes down and he got fouled. There's no doubt, but he got knocked to the ground, and he's kind of on the lower side of the box. He's sitting there, and somehow the ball rebounds back to him. He catches it and banks it in from sitting on the floor. I was like, "Are you kidding me?" It was one of the most amazing shots. And,
Let's stick on that note a little bit, because you're in a real glory age of the Big East. And actually this 1985 season, we're going to get more in depth to. You guys make the Final Four. Spoiler alert. St. John's and Georgetown are also there. What can you tell us about the Big East in that mid-1980s, and what was it like in that environment? You're sitting there and remember that elite 20-20-20 club. So you got a front row seat for all of this. How would you describe the Big East at that time?
Every night was a knife fight where a basketball game happened to break out. It was so physical. And again, I'll use the word intensity. A lot of great coaches, a lot of big personalities in the coaching ranks, but also, in the players. Syracuse had Pearl Washington. You talked about Mullen. Obviously Patrick Ewing. There were a lot of high profile players that were there, but it was a very aggressive, very a league led by coaches who were driven. They were established, but they were all super competitive against each other. And everyone wanted to win. So, the games were always well played. Teams were prepared. It was high quality basketball. It was very rough basketball. Wouldn't fly today. We'd need 8 fouls for each player. But that's how I would. The theme, if there's a theme, it was high intensity. High aggression.
Gotcha. Well, we talked about that regular season finale at Pitt. Not a good game for the Nova faithful. You guys get kind of clobbered there, but then 5 days later, you guys see them in the Big East tournament, and you beat them. But then you lose to St. John's. You're kryptonite, so to speak. You lose to them for the third time that season. So you're 19-10. And you're on the bubble. You mentioned 20 wins kind of seems that magic mark. What's interesting to note is this is the season the tournament expands from 48 to 64 teams. So there you got a little bit of wiggle room there. You played in arguably the premier conference in the country. You got 19-10. But talk about that experience of kind of being on the bubble and kind of knowing this unease of, are we getting in or not?
Yeah, there was tremendous unease. And we would have been highly disappointed had we not gotten in. And clearly we would not have gotten in if it didn't expand to 64 teams. Today it might be a little bit different because back then there were no, metrics that they use now, the strength of schedule, common opponent, wins on the road. There was none of those analytics. It was really like 20 wins.
Record?
That was it. Yeah. So, I don't want to say we were were hopeful. We knew based on who we had played that we could play with anyone, but we weren't hopeful that the selection committee was going to see that. So fortunately, it expanded, and we did have 19 wins, and I think that enabled us to get in there. And then we'll talk about it more, I'm sure. But once you get in, it's house money.
Absolutely. So you guys are a number 8 seed. Ironically, you start opening round. You're playing Dayton in Dayton at their home court. So, and then you got this murderer's row of Michigan, who won the Big Ten. Then you got Maryland with Len Bias. So you got these, and you kind of escape each of these games. What do you recall about maybe those first 3 games specifically? So Dayton, Michigan, Maryland. What stands out about those first 3 games so that you kind of really can kind of recall and remember, because those are all tight games. And I would imagine there might have been some uneasy moments there as well.
There were a lot of uneasy moments. Those games, what I remember is we were a very deliberate team. We were very methodical and could be very athletic when we needed to be. But Coach was a real tactician. And we knew that if we just played our game and executed the game plan on both sides of the court, because, our defense was as important as our offense. There were times where we played 3, 4, 5 different defenses and on one side of the court, depending on where the ball was, above or below the foul line, or what side of the floor it was on. So he was always making teams think much more than they had to. But yeah, I mean, the overall intensity of those games, Dayton on Dayton, it's like, at Dayton, it's like 15,000 people. And yeah, it's an NCAA tournament and tickets are supposed to, be spread out, but that was clearly a home game. And then momentum starts to build, and again, we knew we had the athleticism. Even, with Michigan, they were ranked 1 at some point that season. Matchups were much better for us. The Maryland game, they had beaten us pretty good at Cole Fieldhouse that year. And Lenny Bias was, he was Superman. But, again, game plan, tactician, having the sense that if we stick to this game plan, if we play defense the way we're supposed to play defense, the offense will take care of itself.
What's his strategy in practices to help you guys simulate the type of defense you're going to need to play on a guy like Bias? It's just so weird to try to do that in practice. Did he have certain schemes, or what's Coach thinking?
Yeah, there were a ton of schemes. You had to have a real sharp basketball mind to play for Coach, because the schemes again would change depending on where the ball is on the floor. And it happened real fast. I mean, we could play 2 different zones in man-to-man all in one possession.
Oh, wow.
So you always had to be, on your game. But, he was such a good teacher that it became second nature, and we drilled it from the day practice started on October 15th. We knew that this was going to be our style. So he was really preparing from day one to play these big games.
How did he get you guys to buy into because defense is not the most fun part of playing basketball, at least not for most people. So how do you get you guys to buy in on that?
Well, it was kind of simple. It's if you want to play, you're going to buy in. He wasn't going to tolerate people who didn't buy in.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there was no. I don't think there was a magic wand to it.
Yeah. Would you like to play?
Coach was very clear in his expectations. Communication. He was a clear communicator. The octave of his voice changed on occasion, but he always clearly communicated.
Yeah. They're talking about the octave of his voice. That is a good segue into, after beating Maryland, you are back in the Elite Eight for the third time in your career. Very sloppy first half against North Carolina with a chance to go to the Final Four on the line. You guys are down 22-17 at half. Take us into that halftime locker room, which, as I understand, is one of really Coach Massimino's most iconic moments, and really kind of a legendary moment in Villanova basketball circle.
Yeah, it was, we were very happy with the defense we played. Holding Carolina to 22 points in the first half, we knew we could win. But scoring 17, we knew it was going to be impossible to win. And Coach, to his credit, knew that defense is a function of really being aggressive and being in the right place. Offense is a function of executing with confidence. And he knew we weren't executing with confidence. He could see it. There was a lot of tentative looks around during the first half. And so he came into that a halftime to talk to us. And he kind of had, we were waiting for him to just be motivational.
Yeah.
Say, hey, guys, but he came in and did something that I never heard of from, any other coach. He looked at us. He was quiet. He kind of shook his head, and we're all kind of looking at him. And he said, guys, there's like a great opportunity before us, but you're not focusing. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're not having fun.
Oh, wow.
And when you're not having fun, I don't like to watch you play basketball.
Wow.
I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
I don't like this for you. This is not fun. You know what I'd rather be doing right now than watch this? I'd rather be sitting with a big plate of pasta with clam sauce and a lot of cheese. That's what I'd rather be doing right now. I'd rather be having a big plate of pasta with clam sauce and a big pile of cheese than watch what you're doing right now. And he just kind of shook his head and he said, and then the message was, really? Come on.
That's
said,
so that's so perfect though, because you said you guys are tight on offense, and what's he doing right there, right?
Yeah,
he's just like letting loose, like getting a little silly or sharing a happy moment, that can connect with you so much.
One of his famous lines, or one of his most used lines, was "Just play, just play."
Yeah.
And that's what he said at the end. He goes, just go out, just play.
Yeah, you got to feel like you're at the Rucker, right?
Yeah, just play. And everybody was like, all right, let's just play. And that the way he read the room, which is that made him the master. That made him not only a great basketball coach, but a great, basketball psychologist. He knew what we needed at that point in time. He knew we didn't need to get yelled at. He knew we knew, so it was, the whole just play.
Boy, that really does define coaches though, right? Those kind of in-game reads. When I still feel like when I'm watching a coach, like the ones that end up being the ultimate winners so often are able to just in those split seconds see like, all right, this is the approach to say. And that for a coach, that's the special thing, right? Is being able to read the room.
Yep, absolutely.
There's a great scene when Butler had their great runs with in the 2010 era, the two Final Four runs. And I can recall seeing Brad Stevens on the sideline kind of, down on his knees saying, guys, it's our time, and as they were kind of making a run and just that spirit, I think and I would imagine you experienced this, Brian, when a coach has that kind of confidence in his guys saying, I don't even need to, we know what we need to do on the X's and O's side. I just need you guys to be you. Yeah. That has to just inspire such confidence in you guys, right?
100%. He wasn't trying to micromanage at that point. He had like any good teacher, before an exam, you prepare your class, and he knew we were prepared. Now he just needed to give us the confidence and the freedom to go play, which he did.
Yeah. And, to that point, you guys, okay, you're down 22-17 at halftime. He gives his famous pasta with clam sauce speech, and you guys go out and play, right? You guys outscored the Tar Heels 39-22 in the second half. You win by 12. You reach the Final Four. You're one of 3 Big East teams in the Final Four, as I mentioned earlier, with St. John's and Georgetown. They're on one side of the bracket. You guys have Memphis. Now, you got your hands full with Memphis. But as you look to the other side of the bracket, you see St. John's and Georgetown. Which team is it that you guys wanted? You said, okay, if we get by Memphis, tell us about which team you guys internally said, we want to play those guys.
We wanted to play Georgetown.
Why so? Yeah.
Preseason, they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And, I think the caption was greatest team ever assembled, something like that. But it gets back to the matchups. We did not match up, like I said, against St. John's, but our matchups against Georgetown, we matched up much, much better. We knew we could beat them. We had played them to, I think, a 5-point game and one that we lost in overtime. And, it was because we lost. It wasn't because they won. We just didn't execute down the stretch. Eddie Pickney versus, Patrick Ewing, Patrick intimidated a lot of people. He did not intimidate Eddie Pickney.
That's crazy because Ewing, we want to talk athleticism. Like people, again, you think of maybe like later pro career Patrick Ewing, but when he was at Georgetown, like that guy was an unbelievable athlete, like otherworldly, almost like Olajuwon later.
Yeah, absolutely. And they played to intimidate. And, Eddie grew up in the Bronx and, Dwayne was out of Boston. We had, Harold out of Connecticut. We had guys that we weren't intimidated.
Yeah.
That wasn't the issue. And I think once, in that game against Georgetown, they all of a sudden realized, we weren't intimidated and that game wasn't going to work.
That could go back to what you were saying, too, about like mindset in the locker room. If that's your game plan coming in is to intimidate, how that could, break down your walls if the other team doesn't respond to your tactics.
Correct. And, St. John's, they had our number, but so we were really lucky that, that's how the seedings fell and the brackets fell. And once Georgetown beat St. John's, we were like, great, bring it, because this is now, one game. Anything can happen in one game, not to be, trite, but we knew that. So, back to the house money, it's like, okay, this is, if we couldn't have scripted this any better for our team.
You guys love playing iconic teams too.
Absolutely. Because we had guys with a lot of intensity and a lot of confidence. Gary McLean, our point guard, I think still holds the record for fewest turnovers in the NCAA tournament. He was a floor general. He was personified. He controlled the game and he loved the spotlight. And, having that game and that spotlight, Georgetown's intense. They throw 2, 3, 4 guys at you, depending on where you are. But he was like, we knew everything that was coming from them. We were so well prepared. It was, again,
a great point.
Don't worry about what, yeah.
And before we kind of dig into that Georgetown game, because you first got to get by Memphis, a pretty solid Memphis team. And one of the great lines, you guys get by Memphis. And I think one of the great lines I've ever heard a coach say, the Memphis State coach, Dana Kirk, after you guys beat them, you guys make this number 8 seed and there you are in the championship game, this very kind of miraculous run. He said, if they're a Cinderella team, then Cinderella wears boots. Really kind of hinting at you guys were just ready to play. You guys were just competitors.
Correct. Yeah. And that 8 seeding, I guess, came from the expansion. But we when we looked at that 8 seed, we were like, okay, whatever.
Whatever. Right?
Yeah.
You guys played in the Big East.
Yeah, exactly. No,
and
exactly.
I think that was one of the things you had talked about earlier is that as good as Memphis was, you thought, well, but Memphis is good, but they haven't gone through what we've gone through, and we're ready to ball, right?
They have not been through the crucible that we had been through.
Yeah.
Not many teams had. And that's evidenced by the 3 of the 4 teams coming out of the Big East. And if my memory serves, and it might not be right, but I think Memphis State beat Boston College for that last Final Four spot.
They beat Boston College in the previous, not in the Elite Eight, but in the Sweet 16. They just escaped Boston College. Yeah, so you almost have, almost legitimately close to having 4 teams in the Final Four.
Crazy.
Right. Yeah, but you guys get your wish, and you get Georgetown, and you might have been one of the only teams in the country if faced with the opportunity to play St. John's or Georgetown. As good as St. John's was, you might have been one of the only, if not the only team in the world saying, well, give us the Hoyas at that time. And there was this pregame talk that from you guys, your squad, that you guys needed to play, quote, the perfect game. So what did the perfect game mean to you guys? What was the perfect game you guys had to play to beat that very vaunted Georgetown squad?
Disciplined. We needed to be disciplined on both sides of the floor, right? You can't just play one side of the floor. You got to play both. So the perfect game was not to make every basket, which we almost did in the second half, but it was to play, Villanova basketball the way coach wanted it, in a very disciplined, very focused fashion, very intense, but mindful way. Because we couldn't go out and wing it. The perfect game wasn't going to come out from winging it. And, I don't know if you guys have looked at the statistics of that game.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know it's called the perfect game, but you look at the turnovers that we had in that game. That was anything but a perfect game.
Yeah.
The second half, we almost shot perfectly.
Yep.
But that game was anything but perfect. For anybody who really,
I rewatched it too. It seems like, though, what you guys had is just that execution, like you said. Maybe the perfect team to execute that style against that Georgetown team. You guys just played your game your way the entire game at just the right moment.
Yeah, and to take it off the court for a moment, that perfect game idea was also about enjoying. It was about be present, enjoy this where you are today, because you may not get it ever again. And in our case, as seniors, we never were going to get it again. But Coach brought a level of he brought a level of understanding, meaning that this is just part of life. And to illustrate it, he took us during the Final Four when Georgetown was sequestered, 50 miles away. We went to Claiborne Horse Farm. We went to downtown, Lexington. He took us, he said, let's go have some fun. Let's go do different things. Let's enjoy this experience. So that idea of, that it's almost the perfect experience that he provided for us.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You can forget how young the college players are now. Now that I'm middle age, it's crazy to think about how young you all are in that moment, and to break you guys out of the pressure to do something normal is a great idea.
Yeah. Coach always brought fun when he knew we needed it. It was always part of the element of our team, regardless of practice, not practice. He was cognizant that fun has got to be part of it.
Yeah. And so you guys have this, you go into that Georgetown game, very tight first half, and there's a very memorable end to the first 20 minutes of that game. So just kind of detail for folks maybe aren't as familiar with it, right? Take us through the closing seconds of that half, which was out there for all of us to see, but then take us into the halftime locker room where, you and only a few other were privileged to see. And that was not another clam sauce speech. So take us through that halftime and that end of that first half and that halftime locker room.
Yeah. So in the last few seconds, Chuck Everson was in the game.
Backup center, correct?
Yep, backup center. He was in the game. He goes up for a rebound, comes down, and Reggie Williams turns, and anybody can watch the film, turns and extends both hands up into his face, like to back him off. And we all come flying off the bench looking like there's going to be a fight at the end of the first half of the NCAA championship game. The referees break it up. They go to the film and they say, no foul. And you look at that film today, if that game was played today, that would be a flagrant one out of the game, missed the next one. There's no doubt in my mind. People can argue it, but rational people would understand it. So, we go in and coach is fuming. He's not fuming about the way he played. He was fuming about that they were not going to intimidate us. They've tried this all year long. This is not going to happen in the next 20 minutes. And he basically said to us, you are going to go out there and you are going to show them that you belong here. And he, all his comments were about, not necessarily reacting with the same aggression, but reacting with a cold, calculated style of play. And he knew that style of play would unnerve Georgetown towards the end, because usually teams would fold. And he knew we weren't going to fold. We might get beat, but he knew we weren't going to fold.
Yeah. Notably, you talk about, your game plan. So you guys come out storming into the second half. Your game plan all along was let's control the ball. Ironically, you guys did have 17 turnovers that game. So you struggle a bit on that end, but we're going to take good shots. And not only good shots, every shot we take is going to be great. Interesting to know, this is the last college game, last NCAA tournament game played without a shot clock. So you guys have this ability to kind of really work the ball around. You guys go 9 of 10 in the second half. Only missed the one shot. And so take me through the last, I guess, closing moments of that game. And when you realize, like, hey, we're going to win this.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting last 30 seconds because Georgetown's out of timeouts. We're up 4. And so we're like, all we have to do is inbound the ball. And, they may foul us, so this may turn into a free throw shooting thing. But we get the ball in bounds, we can spread it and it's over. But then, Georgetown cuts it to 2 and miraculously, the clock is ticking with, it's under 10 now and the clock's ticking, but somehow the ball gets knocked into the 4th row of the stands, which we didn't do it, but it miraculously got knocked into the stands.
I'm not saying anything about Georgetown, but we didn't do it.
Just watch. I encourage everybody to watch the last 10 seconds.
I'm gonna get a zoom lens on that.
And that necessitated a whistle. So, okay, now we have to inbound the ball, which, was if there was a weakness in our game, that might have been it.
Especially that night, with the turnovers.
Yep, exactly. So, so the ending is, Dwayne McClain, cutting, and some, got tripped up. So he winds up on the floor with no whistle, and Harold Jensen throws it to him on the floor. And that's how the game ends. But, in terms of kind of knowing when we had the opportunity to win, it was probably, a minute and a half left. And then with about 20 seconds, I was like, wow. And I turned to Steve Pannone, who was next to me. I'm like, we're going to win. And it was like this kind of,
Gosh. That's going to be a cocool feeling.
Moment. Yeah, it was remarkable.
And so it's interesting because that does end, with your teammate on the floor holding the ball, the buzzer sounds. I mean, it's a very kind of unique end of the game. There's obviously pandemonium after. What stands out about, you're a young guy. You were 22 maybe at that time?
Yeah.
That 24 to 48 hours, or that window after the buzzer sounds and that 48 hours after, what stands out about that window of your life?
The first 24 hours were absolute bedlam. It was the party of all parties. And just the hotel was just jammed with people. It was a little Ramada Inn. It wasn't like it was a fancy hotel. It was a Ramada Inn. So, it was jammed. So there might've been 500 people there. I don't know. Gosh. But it was, it was like being in a nightclub where you can't walk. And then the next, so we're flying back to Philly, and we were all, we knew that we were going to get to go to the White House because that's what teams did. And And so coach said, go home for a few days, enjoy your families, come back. And then we'll go to the White House, whenever they call us. But it turned out we were going to the White House sooner than we thought. So we had to scramble to get back, which was kind of fun too. And there's a story attached with that was pretty neat for me.
Cool. So interestingly enough, how does that win kind of change? Give me a sense of just where Villanova was as a university, not only as a basketball program, but even as a university, when you first got there in the early 1980s, because one of the things it seems that win really kind of changed the trajectory and profile of Villanova, not only as a basketball program, but really as a school. So, and you've seen this transformation. Obviously, today the Wildcats are a powerhouse and have two recent national titles to their credit. So, how do you think that win kind of changed the trajectory of the profile of Villanova, not only as a program but also a school?
Yeah, Villanova, going back to the early 70s, was a really good basketball program. They had made a couple of Final Fours, but I think the first time a university wins the national championship, or a seminal game, it changes people's perception. More people start it's brand awareness, if you will. Villanova had great brand awareness, in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic. But the brand awareness for, being on national television through that NCAA run and the coverage that CBS did on it really elevated the program from a visibility perspective. People started to realize that, hey, this is not, just a basketball school. This is a really, really good academic school. So, and I think about schools where, big things have happened. Doug Flutie, when he throws the pass in the Orange Bowl, it changed the perception of Boston
BC,
College.
Yeah.
So, while we always had a good reputation, I think it was just, it opened, it gave more people the opportunity to know about this school just outside of Philadelphia.
That's great. Yeah. Certainly the basketball program has really elevated itself as, I think, in the upper echelon of teams in the national
we had a blue blood argument earlier this year on one of the podcasts, and we're trying to figure out where Villanova sits anymore, even within North Carolina and Duke and all the big time schools. It's really been an upward trajectory.
Well, here's something that, I don't care, I don't know which side of the argument you sit on, but when you look at the last decade, I think it was just last year, Jay Wright was voted NCAA Coach of the Decade.
Yeah.
And you don't get voted Coach of the Decade if you're not pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I love Jay Wright. I can't believe he didn't get plucked, especially after that first championship, because there's you get one championship or kind of bring a school back to national prominence, you start to get talked about constantly, and he really seems to have found a home there, and that's pretty special. I think especially in college basketball, that seems how you cement yourself as a perennial competitive team. Yeah,
we could do a whole podcast about me talking about Jay Wright.
We might need to do that.
He is better than advertised.
Wow.
People look at him and they call him, GQJ.
Yeah. The suits.
He is a guy of substance.
That's cool.
He is, I am so proud that he's the leader of our university's basketball program. He is just, to kind of dumb it down, he's just a really good dude.
That's awesome.
And he has been available to all former players and has helped out a lot of people very quietly. And he loves Villanova. He loves being a college basketball coach. He turned down $8 million at UCLA last year per year. He's a teacher as well, like coach, and he loves his guys. And I've got a great amount of respect for the way he's run that program.
That's when you love it. Like you already find a home where you're just like, look, that you can always chase money, but you can't always find that happiness.
Right.
And, Jay Wright also has one of the all-time great responses to a national title when Chris Jenkins hits the title and everyone's celebrating around him. And he looks like he just got called and told that his table was ready to this, local Chinese restaurant.
That expression on his face.
No, and that's in terms of preparation, and you look at all those guys, they were grace under pressure personified, and he again, like Coach Mass, and I'm sure all great coaches, it's about the execution. And if you execute, we're going to be fine. Just you need to execute, and I don't know if you looked at that clip, but the ball's in midair and Jay turns and basically says bang and starts walking down before the ball even goes in the net.
Yes.
But he's a dear friend, and he's a great coach, but he's even a better person.
That's great. Brian, and then kind of putting a bow on your Villanova experience, at least as a player, what did you take away from that season and that 4-year run as a Villanova basketball player? What did you take away from that kind of really propelled you forward in the rest of your life?
You can do big things if you put your mind to it. If you really focus and are surrounded by like-minded people, life's about effort. It's the effort you put in will dictate what comes out the other side. It's a big message that Coach would share. You are to a degree in control of your own destiny, but you got to work it. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I want to point out, you after that 4-year run as a walk-on ends in that national title, you actually stay on for 2 years as a grad assistant. Then you get into the sports and entertainment business. And I think this is a really great time. I want to talk about your transition into a different career, specifically in philanthropy, which happens with 9/11. So after 9/11, you make that move into the philanthropic world. I'd like to talk a little bit about that shift and the important role Coach Massimino played in helping you along there, as well as your current work with Each One Counts. If you kind of take us through all that.
Sure. Yeah. So, I had been in the sports world for a number of years. I kind of, was thinking about leaving, kind of had a yearning to do what in my mind might be deemed more important in the world. And I was booked on Flight 93 to go to San Francisco. Wow. And my client the Friday before that Tuesday canceled my flight. And because the meeting, they canceled the meeting I was going to go to in San Francisco. So it prevented me from getting on that plane. And I remember coming home from the office that Tuesday, saying to my wife, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, but I'm going to do something else. And we only had one child at that time. And it was the right time to make a move. And, I talked to some people and decided that I wanted to go into the world of philanthropy. So I joined a philanthropic consulting firm out of New York City and, worked with them for about 8 years. But after the 2 years, I kind of had this gnawing about combining my previous world of sports, specifically basketball, with my current world of philanthropy to try to harness, the power of sports. And I came up with an idea. I did a lot of research. I came up with a focus of pediatric hospice care. And, I knew I wasn't going to raise enough money to cure cancer. I knew, I wasn't going to be able to, do things that, St. Jude's are doing or the United Way. I knew I didn't have that bandwidth, but I wanted to create a relevancy with my previous life and the impact that I could make. And so I contemplated, which is what is now the Each One Counts Foundation. And the basic concept is we raise funds to ease the physical pain and suffering of children that are receiving hospice care, that are dying. And what we do is it's hydrotherapy, it's massage, it's music therapy, it's art therapy, it's yoga. And as I started thinking about those modalities to ease pain, I realized that athletes You can't see an athlete without a headphone on prior to a game.
Yeah.
It's music therapy.
Yeah.
You can't find an athlete that doesn't get a massage after a game.
They mandated after some of the games.
Yeah. So the relevance, like what's the relevance between the sports world and what I'm trying to raise money for is these folks get it. They viscerally get that these modalities, whirlpools, things like that, they know hydrotherapy works.
It works.
So, and the concept of the name, each one counts was, in basketball, each second, each minute, each,
love that.
pass, each shot, in baseball, each swing of the bat, it all counts. And like these kids that are unfortunately passing away, they all count. So we're, I say we're an agnostic foundation. It's not a child that has we don't, help kids with one condition. We help, doesn't matter what they have. They all count.
Pain is universal.
Pain is universal. So how do we, and so over the years we've been doing that, but, to really get the thing running, I had thought like, you need credentializers, in both worlds, and I was getting to learn the world of philanthropy. I might have, thought of myself as somebody who had some juice in the sports world, but I knew I needed somebody really iconic that people would listen to. So I called Coach Massimino. I said, Coach, I need to talk to you about an idea. And he said, well, I'm going to be in New York at a golf outing in a week or so. Why don't you come and we'll get together there? I'm like, sure. So I go, in the golf, they're done playing, coach comes out, he sees me, and he said, what do you got? And I tell him this concept. And, I said to him, I said, Coach, nobody's taking Brian Harrington's phone calls, but everybody's going to take Coach Massimino's phone calls. I said, I need you to help me do this. And he said, absolutely. And he jumped on board immediately. And we went from that, I said, okay, great. Thank you. He said, he was going into the cocktail portion of the event.
Yeah.
And I said, all right, good seeing you. I'll tell you more about it. He said, no, come with me. You're gonna sit with me.
God, that speaks so much to what you said about him. That 40, not 4 years, it's 40 years, and so much about your guys' team too. Like executing every moment. Like he recognizes those little moments that matter.
Yep. And we he introduced me to a bunch of people who have been supporting the foundation since that day over 10 years ago.
Crazy. And that's eachonecounts.org, right?
Correct.
All right.
Yep.
I'd encourage anybody listening to make a donation. I'm going to as soon as we're done here.
It's a terrible website, but it's I'm not good with technology.
That's all right. That's all right. When you get something that matters, you figure it out. What you're doing for the kids is the important part.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and we appreciate you sharing that with us, Brian, because I think it, as Aaron kind of said, it kind of puts a great, really wraps up the experience you had at Villanova. We talked about Coach Massimino, when your first impressions of him to here he is, a decade ago, helping you get Each One Counts off the ground and still playing a prominent role in your life. So before we wrap up here, Brian, and we're so grateful for your time here with 19.9 and letting us, we're all about celebrating basketball, college basketball history, and you've really allowed us a great window into the world of a really phenomenal team. Before we let you go, just want to do some rapid fire questions, just some quick hits that maybe can kind of say, hey, you guys spent 4 years in a very prominent program in a prominent league. What comes to mind here? So eliminate the Villanova Stadium. What was the best arena to play in?
As a kid from New York, Madison Square Garden.
Oh, man, I love hearing
that. The most famous arena in the world.
Gotcha. If I could just take that further, I thought you might say, and especially Madison Square Garden, when you're talking the Big East tournament or against St. John's, outside of Madison Square Garden, I'm curious, where else did you like playing? Where else was a cool place to go?
So I'll say it's got to do with Villanova, but it's the Palestra in Philadelphia. Yeah. That's just an iconic basketball arena.
Yeah, on my bucket list for sure. Tell me about the best player you saw during your 4-year career.
I'm going to give you two. Chris Mullin. Chris Mullin was unbelievable. And then, I've got to include Michael Jordan, although he wasn't the Michael Jordan that he was then. But he knew something special was happening.
Yeah.
Gotcha. One of the great little anecdotes you gave me in our first chat that helped me produce the Tales from the Bench series on the 19.9 blog, you said that all your team members had to sing at pregame meal. Yeah. So tell me, who was the winner there and who fell flat?
I got to say, Gary and Dwayne, the McLeans, they were really good. Nice. They were really good. The guy that fell flat unequivocally was me. So here are guys that are singing. They're singing the start. Yeah, they're singing. All the most current rap songs. I get up and I don't know the words of a song. I grew up with an AM radio in my house.
Oh my gosh!
And the only words that I knew were the Star Spangled Banner.
Oh no!
And I got napkins thrown at me. I got booed. It was, poor choice of song and really poor voice.
You got to know your audience there, Brian.
Yeah, man. But that is not in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, me neither.
It's so not in my wheelhouse that I went to a Catholic school growing up. In second grade, I got cut by the choir.
Oh my gosh!
Like that's impossible for a second grader to do.
Oh.
All right, and we're almost wrapping up here. Tell me about your favorite Coach Massimino story.
We've talked about the pasta. We've talked about halftime at Georgetown, but my favorite story of Coach Mass is when I was a grad assistant. We had this Villanova basketball van. And, back then there was a lot of driving to camps and to speak and to recruit and things like that. So it's not necessarily a story, but it's the times that I got to drive him somewhere. And the one that is most vivid is that he was speaking out in the middle of Pennsylvania on like literally 105-degree day. And we're driving out there and it's oppressively hot. And we get there and he looks at me and he goes, go downtown, find 2 bathing suits, get a couple of supplies. You can think about what supplies meant in terms of some beverages. And he hands me like $100. And so I go get 2 bathing suits and I get some supplies and we get back in the van and he goes, there's a lake, like 20 minutes from here. We drove over to the lake and just hung out and, swam for a while. And, it was really, I won't forget it.
That's great. I appreciate you shining a light on Coach Massimino. The 3rd anniversary of his passing is coming up here later this month. I'm sure that is a moment that means a lot to you and your teammates who spent a lot of time with him and whom he had a very profound impact on. So thanks so much. So, Brian, we connected here to talk as part of our Tales for the Bench series, where we talk to kind of members of these iconic teams. So before we let you go, curious to hear about maybe you're a college basketball fan, what team would you be interested to kind of get behind the scenes a bit and learn a bit more about?
I was growing up, I was a big North Carolina and Indiana fan. I just, both of those schools were, they were on TV all the time. So, more about those two would be interesting to learn about. I mean, current day, Gonzaga, I'm impressed with what Coach Few has done out there over the years. It's the Villanova of the West. So,
No doubt, yeah.
He's got a great program.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, Brian, again, we're so grateful for you joining us here on the 19.9 podcast. Really great time, great stories, and we certainly appreciate all your time. I'm going to hand it off to Aaron, and we'll close this off.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Chucker. Everyone, check out eachonecounts.org. Send them a donation. Such a cool charity. Just so awesome to talk to you today, and what great stories to share with everybody. Really appreciate the time from both of you guys today. We'll be back with the 1992 NBA draft. It will be our next podcast, and I'm sure Chucker will be back soon with another Tales from the Bench. I'm just loving this series. So thanks both of you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the 19.9 podcast with HVS, the High Volume Shooters. For more information, check out the blog at 19.9.com under HVS. And while you're there, do yourself a favor and pick up some retro college shorts. Till next time.